mission and strategy is that what that we keep talking about. The mission of every organization, the strategy of every organization will be adapted or changed based on the world around them. And so we're starting to see, instead of a clearly articulated strategy, we're seeing a lot more around broad themes, and then within those broad themes there are initiatives that come and go based on the ability to achieve that. So whether it be looking at efficiency, if you're in a commodity business, that efficiency is driven by a combination of several things, not just by one or two things. So the initiatives are going to come and go based on what we need to do from this broad strategy of becoming a cost-effective, time-driven organization. Some of the other key elements that we see in these in the operating system that are in some cases successful, in some cases not, but certainly they're all elements that we believe need to be there. First one is business intelligence. You have to be able to read the river. You have to know what's ahead. You have to know what hazards are coming. And so you've got to have a very robust ability to look outside your organization. At the same time, you have to have that same ability to look inside your organization and clearly understand within the context of what's happening outside, do we have what we need? Are we reacting the way that we need to? Are we measuring the right things? And so that's business intelligence. The technology and MIS systems are currently probably the place that people are having the biggest challenge keeping up. We still seem to see organizations that adopt 3, 4, or 5-year plans to roll out technology, whether it be an EMR in a hospital system or whether it's an ERP system at a manufacturing company. These large-scale, long-term projects are taking place, and what people need to be doing is taking a look at the principles we talked about before, talking about speed, how versus what, et cetera, and beginning to understand that technology and MIS can be critical and are critical to success in the future, and our ability to react much, much faster has to be taken into context here. So from an operating perspective, the technology and MIS systems and the decisions we make around those are critical to how we're going to be successful as a high-performing enterprise in the future. We talked a little bit about innovation, but innovation is problem-solving as well. So how do we go around doing continuous improvement? How do we go about finding opportunities to improve quality? How do we go about finding opportunities to deal with an ongoing customer issue? All the way to how do we deal with executing against a particular strategy? So all of that innovation and problem solving comes into play there. And then the last piece on the right is what we talked about before, which is business processes. And these are typically your operational processes, but they also can be HR. They can be administrative. They can be embedded in the sales process. A lot of times those tend to be the things that we leave till the end. We're always working on our operational processes and a lot of times our administrative processes, but sometimes we don't deal with the customer-facing processes as early as we should. And in this particular case, what we're articulating is that all of those business processes are critical within the operating system. So that's kind of an overview. Some of these are just minimums, but certainly your organization might have other things. We might need to put, for example, in the social architecture, we might need to add organizational structure in there because you might have a unique organizational structure, especially in large banks. We see that. Certainly, we also see challenges around organizational structure when you talk about a healthcare system which has independent physicians versus employed physicians, et cetera. So you might see those kind of challenges where we need to include that as a part of the social architecture of your particular business. So the next thing we talk about is deliberate practice, and it was really has come into vogue lately when out of a book called Talent is Overrated that talked about how individuals become successful, and what we're more concerned about is cycles of use, or what we call deliberate practice at the enterprise level. And so this example just talks about Tiger Woods, who basically might only see this golf shot, a couple of times during the season, but he practices it all the time. And what we want to talk about from an organizational level is that we need to do that same level of practice all the time. We need to find opportunities to go look at, within the context of the operating system, the social architecture, what are those things we need to be working on with a coach, just as deliberate practice talks about having an outside coach. What are those things we need to work on to be successful in the future as an enterprise, not as an individual? Obviously, at an individual level, we support that same theory, but we're talking about the enterprise level right now. So what we talk about cycles of use, what we mean is that we need to find what is relevant for us to try to achieve. What are the things that we need to be working on as an organization, and not just look at how do we make incremental minor improvements, but how do we make step change improvements? How do we make leaps beyond the competition? And what are those things that we as an enterprise need to be working on together? Typically, it's a good place to start when we look at purpose and core values. So based on what we want to be and what we really believe, purpose and core values, those are the things that we want to start with as our framework for determining what are those cycles of use that we need to be working on. And once we determine that, then we can determine, who do we need as this coach? How do we need to approach it so that we can put together the practice cycles? When you look at organizations like the military, they're constantly coming up with different scenarios to play war games, for example, so that they can begin to build capabilities that allow them to, when they are in the heat of battle, that the people in the organization will make the right decisions. We need to adopt a similar mindset in the commercial world, in the business world, where we're identifying those things that we need to work on, putting time and effort into developing those capabilities, and those need to be in the context of purpose and core values that we begin to work on. So the thing is, don't take it lightly. It's a heavy investment, but at the same time, it's critical that we do that. Now, this is not an either-or type of activity. There needs to be deliberate practice or cycles of use happening all the time while we're also dealing with our daily operating needs, executing against our strategic plan, evaluating and developing talent. All of that stuff has to be happening, but in parallel with that, we need to have time set aside to where we go through the cycles of use. We coach the organization and build capabilities. All of that has to happen at the same time, and as we do, then those two need to be talking to each other so that we embed those new learnings that we have out of the cycles of use activity into the next cycle that we might go through on talent development or on strategic planning or strategic execution. So just some takeaways from the whitewater world. One, we're certainly in a world of continuous rapids. It's not going to stop. Certainly in the near future, we're going to constantly have uncertainty. We're going to have turmoil. We're going to be heavily impacted by the ability to mitigate risk. We need to be innovative, and we need to find ways to solve problems, but all of that's going to be on a case-by-case, real-time basis. Some of the principles that we covered today were purpose and core values, and the way that we go about dealing with this world that's in constant flux. Speed is critical to success. We need to constantly look at speed, not just from a standpoint of how we deliver value, but how the organization, as a living, breathing organization, reacts to those changes that are happening outside the world. They're unpredictable and tumultuous. A lot of times we find leaders that want to minimize the amount of impact that change has on the organization, and it's getting to a point where that's impossible. You can't minimize the amount of change that's happening in your organization. The front line actually feels it before anybody else because they hear the voice of the customer much, much faster. How is much more critical than what, so we are going to change what based on the needs of the organization, but we need to have that how embedded in the organization on how we're going to deliver value, how we're going to make those decisions, how we're going to train and develop talent, and people are the linchpin to that. So without people, we can't do any of this. Our competitive advantage it rests in our ability to develop the organizational soft side of the business to deliver against the first three that we talked about. The Rosetta Stone we talked about, its ability for us to take that and potentially map our own organization to that. How do we identify what our current operating system is? How do we identify what our current social architecture is? How do we know what our purpose and core values are? And then create a playbook to go do cycles of use to develop those capabilities where we have gaps, just like Tiger Woods, hitting out of the bunker. How do we figure out where our bunkers are, and how do we go practice in those bunkers and deal with those organizational things? How do we perform that diagnostic? So we need to take that Rosetta Stone and decipher our own organization, assess it against that once we know what those elements are, and then develop a playbook to go through the cycles of use. So ongoing, structured, rapid cycles of learning and improvement are critical to success in the future. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Melissa.
Okay, thank you, Ron. If you have questions for Ron, he will be available in the networking lounge immediately after this presentation for a live chat session from 1 to 1:15 Central Time, so please stop by the networking lounge. And if you have additional questions, we've included some contact information for you here. This wraps up our web seminar for today. Thank you for your time, and have a great day.